Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for adramofoutlander.com for all things Outlander, from the Diana Gabaldon book series to the Starz TV series and everything in between. This is Voyager Read Along, week 24, episode 66, and we're covering chapter 61. So what happened in Outlander world this week? Well, the biggest news is that Katrina Balfe, our dear Claire, did not win the Golden Globe Award. It went to Claire Foy. She had some stiff competition, and her being nominated is phenomenal considering she comes from a freshman and sophomore show. I have no doubt that in the years to come, she will have ample accolades and awards from the industry. We're going to move right into the podcast. And thank you for joining me at my table for conversation and a dram of Outlander. Chapter 21, The Crocodile's Fire. So when we left off the last episode, Claire and Jamie were huddled in their makeshift shelter from the rain, and they had seen the Reverend Campbell going toward Rose Hall. And Jamie believed he knew where young Ian was being held, and perhaps other boys, we don't know. And they had to wait a couple of days in order to go back and try and rescue him. They're on the river now, and Lawrence Stern is with them. He knows the landscape, he knows the people. He's explaining to Claire that those who live in the hills have used the river as the main passageway, so it's often very busy on the river. And it is this night as well. And Claire describes a barge and some smaller craft. Jamie thanks Lawrence for coming along with them. Even though the small craft was crowded, it was comforting to have him around. And Stern said he has curiosity over it all, as he has met the lady before. Ooh, he has, And he's asked what he thinks of her. Oh, she was a very pleasant lady, most gracious. Meaning he probably had some kind of sexual encounter with her, heavy flirtation. She's pretty much known for that. Claire thought this was amusing, and knowing Gailey or Gayless, as she knows her, she thinks she must have wanted something from him to treat him with such regard. She always comes with strings attached. He indeed met her at Rose Hall. He needed permission to collect a type of beetle that was on her land. It's Curculionidae, or Curculionidae. And I did find out, as I was looking up this type of beetle, that in the book itself, in Voyager, it's misspelled. I found a typo I'd never seen in all these years. And Diana Gabaldon did get back to me via Twitter and say that I indeed had found it. And so this is a type of beetle that is found in Jamaica. But he was collecting them, the natural philosopher that he is. And he had found them near her plantation. And so when he went to ask for permission, she invited him in and made him feel most welcome. I bet she did. And if you could see me, I'm waggling my eyebrows right now. What did she want from you? Asked Jamie. She particularly liked his stories about Hispaniola. What does that bring to mind? Caves, perhaps? Remember the conversation he had with Claire way back at the priest's house? It is difficult to believe that such a lovely woman might engage in such reprehensible behavior as you described, James. Oh, how the male ego and penis are blind. Jamie questions her loveliness, and he asks if Stern is smitten. Here's what Stern says. There is a sort of carnivorous fly I have observed, friend James. The male fly, choosing a female to court, takes pains to bring her a bit of meat or other prey, tidily wrapped in a small silk package. While the female is engaged in unwrapping her tidbit, he leaps upon her, performs his copulatory duties, and hastens away. For if she should finish her meal before he has finished his own activities, or should he be so careless as to not bring her a tasty present, She eats him. There was a soft laugh in the darkness. No, it was an interesting experience, but I think I shall not call upon Mrs. Abernathy again. Not if we're lucky about it, no, Jamie agrees. Yeah, she is a little bit of a black widow, is she, no? And as they get near Rose Hall, Claire's left by the riverbank to mind the boat. Jamie gives her instructions to stay put. Has that ever worked once? One time? No, it has never worked. And I don't think he's ever going to learn. It makes him feel better to say it, knowing she's likely not going to be there when he gets back. She has a pistol, and she has instructions not to shoot herself in the foot. And as she sits there by herself, she feels how oppressive the darkness is. She could see the house from her vantage point, and her heart leaps when she sees a shadow. But it wasn't Gailey's. With none of the men in earshot, Claire hikes up her skirts and runs toward the house to see who it is. Of course she does, silly Claire. She's on the veranda and she peers into the window. There's a fire going, and the secretary was enfolded with papers and books to be seen. Old books. She could see no one, but the room was not in complete view either. With every step, her imagination went running bananas. She kept thinking that Hercules could be somewhere near. The house seemed oddly quiet, deserted even. She keeps telling herself, it means nothing. But where were the servants? There were normal duties to be done even after sundown. She finally comes to the front door, and it's open. She listens and thinks she hears rustling like the turning of pages. With courage that she musters, she steps into the house. Does this seem very wise, smart, reasonable? No. Curiosity. And Claire, she's like a cat sometimes. Claire felt the desertion more than ever now. Things seemed unkempt and neglect visible. There were dishes around, hadn't been tidied up like normal. Where the hell was everybody? She heard the rustling of pages again, peeks into the salon, and sees a tall, thin, dark-haired man leaning over the secretary. She thinks it's Ian, so she says his name as loudly as she dares. The man stands quickly. Jesus, Claire says. It's the Reverend Campbell, not Ian. He asks why she's there. She says she's looking for her husband's nephew. They think he might be there. When she asks where Mrs. Abernathy is, he says she left. He doesn't know. What? What do you mean your husband's nephew? Left? Where has she gone? He doesn't know. She was gone when he woke that morning, and all her servants with her. Claire agrees it does seem inhospitable for her to have done such a thing. She asks if he'd seen a boy of about 15, tall, thin, and dark brown hair. She supposes not, and says she should go. At this, he grabs her arm and asks what her real name is. She tries to tell him Malcolm, but he knows. It is James Fraser, per Galis. Claire tries to tell him he is wrong about Jamie, after he demands to know where he is. The Reverend tightens his grip on her arm. You've talked to him about Margaret? Yes. And Claire explains it was you and Cameron she followed to Culloden. Remember, the Reverend thinks it's Jamie who seduced her? He shakes Claire. It's a lie and it doesn't matter anyway. Where is he? She says he's in Kingston. Claire was near some doors to the veranda. Would it be better or worse to stay in the house or have him chase her outside and maybe catch her? So she's calculating an escape plan. I think we all would do that as well. What's the safest? The Reverend was scowling at her at this point. And then she sees something outside. It's the pelican, Ping On. The Reverend asks what she sees. What's out there? Just a bird, she says. This means Willoughby is nearby. What ought she do about it? The Reverend doesn't believe Jamie is in Kingston, that he is in fact near, and will retrieve Claire. She tries to assure him she came alone to see Galis. Her husband isn't expecting her back until next month. He doesn't believe her. Then he asks, "So you are staying here?" With all the servants gone, there was no one to confirm or deny it. He says she should know then where Galus went and when she'll be back. Claire did have an idea, but wasn't going to share it with the Reverend. She says she didn't know, as she'd been visiting a neighboring plantation and had just returned herself. With what she was wearing, he couldn't challenge her story. Claire then tries to dismiss herself, saying he must have important work to do. He says he's finished the work and was preparing copies for Mrs. Abernathy of the documents. Claire remarks that it's interesting what he's been doing and thinks that it's reasonable to retire to a theoretical room. Then it would be a simple matter to slip out and find Jamie. If she had only stayed put. He tries to talk to her about Scottish history and scholarship with a fanatical gleam in his eye she knew all too well. She begs off, saying it's interesting, again, but she knows little about it. Then she notices the papers on the desk. It's a Fraser of Lovat genealogy chart. It began somewhere around the 1400s to the present. She could see Simon Fraser, Brian Fraser, and underneath, James A. Fraser. A chill went down her back. What was going on here? The Reverend was amused seeing her reaction. Apparently the Frasers were part of a prophecy. Do you not know of it? But perhaps your husband being an illegitimate descendant? I don't know of it, no. He thought maybe Mrs. Abernathy had discussed it with her. She wrote to him in Edinburgh regarding the matter. The original text was there, by Bron Seer. He was a 16th century prophet, a Scottish Nostradamus. It's a prophecy for sure, poetic language or not. The prophecy states that a new ruler of Scotland will spring from Lovat's lineage. This is to come to pass following the eclipse of the kings of the White Rose, a clear reference to the Papist Stuarts, of course. He nodded at the white roses woven into the carpet. There are somewhat more cryptic references included in the prophecy, of course, the time in which this ruler will appear, and whether it is to be a king or queen. There is some difficulty in interpretation owing to mishandling of the original. He continued to talk, but Claire wasn't really listening at this point. And now she was sure she knew Gailey had gone to disappear. Her obsession with the restoration of the Stuart throne, and now she thought she knew what was next, a ruler in the Fraser lineage. But to where? Back to Scotland? Get in with the heir of Lovat? But with thinking about going back to the future, did she know who the heir was then? At this, Claire looks up with a question on her lips for the Reverend, but instead it froze upon her lips. There was Mr. Willoughby. His clothing was torn and stained. He looked tired and hungry. It had definitely been rough on him. He acknowledges her with a flick of the eye, but his attention was on the Reverend through and through. He acknowledges her with a flick of the eye, but his attention was on the Reverend through and through. "Most holy fella," he said with a taunting voice Claire had never heard before. The swift turn of the Reverend caused him to knock over a vase, soaking all the papers. Horrified, he grabs the papers, shaking them to get the excess water off before the ink can run. "See what you've done, you wicked murdering heathen." Mr. Willoughby gave an unamused laugh. "I murdering? Not me, holy fella. Is you murderer." The Reverend tries to dismiss him. "I know you. I see you in Red Room with the woman who laughs. See you too with stinking whores in Scotland." And he moves his hand across his throat in demonstration. "You kill pretty often, holy fella, I think." The Reverend goes pale, as did Claire from fear. She speaks, and he corrects her mildly. "I am Yi Chen Cho." The Reverend demands him to leave at once, but he doesn't. "Better you leave, first wife, holy fellow like women, not with cock, with knife." Claire couldn't breathe hearing this, like she was in a too tight corset. Again the Reverend tries to get Yi Chen Cho to leave. Claire interrupts. She's holding the primed pistol toward him, telling him to stand still. He does, staring at her. The sensation of holding someone at gunpoint had quite an intoxicating effect on Claire. She didn't know what to do next. She asked Yi Chen Cho if he saw the Reverend at the governor's ball. Yes, he saw him kill the widow. "Better shoot, first wife." The Reverend tries to tell her not to believe Yi Chen Cho, that it's ridiculous. Claire understands. She does understand, though. But I think I do. You were there. I saw you, and you were in Edinburgh when the last prostitute was killed there. Nellie Cowden said you'd lived in Edinburgh for 2 years. That's how long the fiend was killing girls there. The trigger was slippery under her forefinger. But the Reverend tries to point a finger at Yi Chen Cho again, saying he lived there the same amount of time. And then he outs Yi Chen Cho as the one who betrayed Jamie to Sir Percival, because Sir Percival told the Reverend personally. Claire nearly drops the gun. This was too much information, too fast to process. Jamie would surely come to the house if she wasn't at the rendezvous point. Jamie would surely come to the house if she wasn't at the rendezvous point, right? She aims the gun again at the Reverend, and she was going to have him move into the breezeway to the kitchen, but, as she says, I think you'd better, she squeezes the trigger, but she misses him. And now he reaches into his pocket, pulling out the knife. Claire enters crisis mode. She starts to see everything very clearly, from the nick on the edge of the blade to the smell of the roses the Reverend crushes under his feet as he comes toward her. She's preparing to fight, knowing there's nothing else she can do. Her left arm burns with the memory of the saber slash. Then all of a sudden, there's a thunk. The Reverend turned slowly and fell to the ground. He fell all at once, not even a hand to slow his body down. Claire steps back against the wall, feeling trapped. No, the Reverend wasn't dead yet, but his color was changing. Sammy is here, first wife? Yes. He's here, out there, she says. Now she's starting to feel shock taking hold of her. What? He did? You really? Was it you? Had he betrayed Jamie? She wanted to know. He didn't answer. She opens her eyes to him standing there watching the Reverend. He lies there as if he's dead. The Reverend was on the floor as if he was dead, but he wasn't yet. He was dying. It wasn't an Englishman then, an English name, Willoughby. Not Willoughby. I am Yi Chen Cho. She yells at him, wanting to know why. In China, there are stories, prophecy, that one day the ghost will come. Everyone fear ghost. I leave China to save my life. Waking up long time, I see ghosts. All round me ghosts. A big ghost comes. Horrible white face. Most horrible. Hair on fire. I think he will eat my soul. I am right. He eat my soul, Sammy. I am no more Yi Chen Cho. He saved your life, Claire says. I know. Better I die. Better die than be Willoughby. Willoughby! Pah! He talks my words, Sammy. He eats my soul. And there was a flash of anger in Yi Chen Cho that leaves quickly. He explains he was drunk in the tavern, wanting a woman, but no woman would have him. A ghost man came to him and asked if he knew a McDo. He'd said he did, and that it doesn't matter what he'd told the man. And right then, they saw the Reverend's last breath, and he stilled. It is a debt, he says as he looks at the body. I am dishonored, I am stranger, but I pay your life for mine, first wife. You tell Sammy. Yi Chen Cho nods and heads toward the veranda door. Turning back, he softly tells her, When I wake at the dock, I am thinking ghosts have come, are all around me, but I am wrong. It is me. I am the ghost. And he leaves. So he betrayed Jamie. He connected all the dots. It was an English name, not an English man, because he felt like Jamie had stolen everything from him and giving him an Englishman's name and speaking his language. He was very proud, and he's wondering now if he should have simply died. And Claire hears Ping Na take flight behind him. She somehow makes it to the couch before her knees give way. She doesn't want to faint. She thinks she hears wheezing, but the Reverend lies still. She knows she can't stay in the room with him. All the events from the evening were coming into focus for her. There really was no time to process it at all, but she remembered the Reverend's words before Yi Chen Cho came in. She went upstairs to look for clues as to where Galus had gone. And she resisted looking behind her as she went up the stairs. She felt very cold. That house must feel completely haunted and unsafe. But Claire needs a job to do, so she is going to keep moving. She's going to try and get more clues and figure out what's happening. Otherwise, I think she would have been paralyzed with fear and couldn't leave. So let's take a moment. All these revelations being hurled at Claire. The Reverend murdered all those women in Edinburgh and the Merry Widow. And Yi Chen Cho paid for his betrayal of Jamie by saving Claire's life. There's a Fraser of Lovat prophecy that we need to learn more about. Galus has disappeared with all her servants in tow. And we would have to presume that she took young Ian with her. Wow, that's a lot of information in a very short amount of time. Claire made her way up to the workroom. The odor in the air stung her nose as she breathed. Burning mercury, she thinks. That's highly toxic. And she notices there was a pentacle. The stones were missing, but the singed photo of Brianna was in the middle. Claire thinks it must be Galus's version of magic. That Galus was trying to use her technique of focusing on a person in the time she wishes to go to, and Galus was using the image of Brianna. Then remembering all the papers on the desk downstairs, she knew Brianna is the one and only heir of Lovat, and she knows what time Brianna lives in, 1968. Claire hears a noise and then realizes she's making this low growling noise inside her own throat. She grabs up the photograph and runs out of the workroom, determined to find Jamie now. Do you remember where the nearest passageway is? You know it. We've heard about it. Think, think, think. Where might Galus be going? Claire makes it back to the rendezvous point, only to find no one there still. The boat was under the tree where Jamie had left it. The tree was a cecropia. It's a soft, wooded, thin tree with an umbrella-like top. That description reminds me of Dr. Seuss for some reason. Claire was taking in all the scents and sights. And depending on the direction of the wind, she could smell the cane fields and burnt sugar or the clean scent of moss and wet rocks from the stream. So her hyper-focus is back. She's relating to the environment. And details pop at her when this happens. She decides to climb up the stream bank, and she gets disgustingly muddy in the process. She is starting to feel alarmed. Bloody hell, where was Jamie? Looking toward Rose Hall, she sees 2 torches by the front gate and a glow from the refinery. Had Jamie and the men met with trouble? Then she hears singing in the distance and could see the glow from a large open fire. This night makes her feel uneasy. Okay, she just witnessed a murder. All this information is coming at her. It's pitch black outside. She can't find Jamie. Yes, I'd say there's reason to feel uneasy. She suddenly smells something different, like rotten meat. She takes a step and all hell breaks loose underfoot. A large object explodes into movement close to her, and there was a blow across her lower legs that knocks her off her feet. She had landed on her behind and then flips onto all fours. Whatever it was that hit her on the foot, it hit her on the foot, and she got up onto her feet, running. She was in a blind panic, and she runs straight into a man knocking the torch from his hand. She finds herself pressed against a bare-chested black man, and there are shouts all around her. And this slave was gaping at her. "Missus, what you be doing here?" But before she could answer, he was distracted. 6 men surrounded the beast. Claire describes what the men wore, loincloths, and how many torches, 2, and that they had held sharpened poles. Her legs were stinging and wobbly from the blow they had taken. When she saw what had struck her, they nearly gave way again. The thing was nearly 12 feet long, with an armored body the size of a rum cask. The great tail whipped suddenly to one side. The man nearest leapt aside, shouting in alarm, and the saurian's head turned, jaws opening slightly to emit another hiss. So what is a saurian? It is belonging or pertaining to the sauria, a group of reptiles originally including the lizards, crocodiles, and several extinct forms, but now technically restricted to the lizards. It also is something resembling a lizard. A saurian animal, as in a dinosaur or lizard. So use of the word saurian came about between 1800 and 1810, so Claire must have read it somewhere in the future. "Never smile at a crocodile," she says. "No, ma'am, I surely won't." The men poke at the crocodile with the poles, irritating it. A scared man launches away, slamming into Claire, and then launches himself onto the back of the crocodile. The others were encouraging him. The man on the crocodile's back was groping for the mouth and succeeds in holding it shut. A man she hadn't seen stepped out of the darkness and places a noose around the croc's jaws. The man rose, yelling at the men in another language. Claire, seeing the tail sweep, wonders how her legs weren't broken, but merely bruised. The leader, of course, was the man called Ishmael. Claire was feeling shocky and everything unreal. With the poles, the men were able to turn the croc over onto his back. Ishmael stops the men shouting when he places his hand out palm up, as if asking for a scalpel. I love this imagery. Claire's a doctor. She would have done the very same thing, holding out her hand in the OR. A blade was in his hand in a moment. Then he sliced the crocodile's throat. The beast was in dying throes, and the men stepped back. Ishmael stood tall, fully dressed, except for bare feet. And he had small leather bags hanging from his belt. Claire sits down hard, her legs no longer responding to the adrenaline in her body. Ishmael and the other men turned toward her. She felt a bit like the dying crocodile in her breathing and consciousness losing its grip. She describes her and the crocodile having stertorous breathing, gasping and noisy. And then the mud was cool on her cheek. Yes, she was about to faint. She doesn't think she completely lost consciousness, because she does remember being lifted into someone's arms. They were all speaking in an excited way. She couldn't tell them to put her down and cover her up, because she needed to stay warm if she was in shock. Leaves touched her face as she was carried through the cane field. No one spoke but the rustling of the stalks. By the time they reached the clearing and slave huts, Claire was back to herself, but she didn't advertise this fact. She stayed limp as she was carried into one of the huts. She was trying to come up with a plan before waking up. Again, where in the bloody hell were Jamie and the others? Were they okay? Would they find her? See the struggle? What was Ishmael doing here? He was not cooking, that's for sure. She hears festivities outside and the smell of alcohol of some sort. There was no way she could escape unseen. She rolls onto one knee cautiously. Could she get away into the cane fields through the dark? Could she find the river again? If she did make it to the main house, the Reverend's dead body is in there. Or the river. But if she didn't know how to get back there, how would she find them? So Claire's head is spinning. And she's going through all the logistics, all the possibilities in a frantic, chaotic manner. Just then, a figure shadows the door. She sits up and shrieks. It's Ishmael. He tells her not to make that noise. And he's wearing the crocodile head like a hat. He makes sure that she wasn't hurt by the crocodile. She says she doesn't think so, thanks to the men, and asks if he would mind taking off the head. He ignores her. Why you bein' here? She tells him the truth, and then a drop of moisture falls from the nostril of the crocodile head onto her hand, and she shudders. Ishmael says the missus is not there tonight. Claire knows and asks if someone can take her back to the big tree by the river, but again he ignores her and says, likely she be taking a boy with her. Mrs. likes boys. Claire asks if he knows when she'll be coming back. He didn't reply before a voice behind her said, I know you, do I not? It's Miss Campbell. Yes, the Reverend's unsound sister. Claire thinks she looks far healthier than last time she saw her, leaner and with better color to her skin. Even so, it's obvious she still wasn't all together in the here and now. Margaret hadn't even noticed that Ishmael was wearing the crocodile head, or seemed to have noticed him at all. It is most civil in you to call upon me, Mum. Might I offer you refreshment of some kind, a dish of tea, perhaps? We keep no claret, for my brother holds that strong spirits are a temptation to the lusts of the flesh. I dare say they are. and Claire thinks she could use a little bit of temptation right at the moment. Ishmael rises and asks if she's ready to go, and he calls Margaret Bebe. She says she is and asks Claire to join them near the fire. This is where it gets truly strange, as if the whole night hasn't been odd enough for Claire to handle. Outside there was a bonfire burning in the center of the clearing. The crocodile had already been cleaned and skinned. Its meat was being cooked on sticks stuck in the fire. 36 men, women, and children gathered around, and one of the men was singing and had a guitar. The crowd quieted when they saw Ishmael, Margaret, and Claire approaching. Margaret took the seat of honor on the bench on the dais. She summoned Claire to sit with her. The stares were upon Claire, but most were watching Margaret. The faces were of Africa, not like that of Joe Abernathy. He seemed so much more like her than them. The mention of Joe, I am sure, is meaningful. The man who'd been singing and playing guitar put it aside for a drum. He began to play. It sounded like the rhythm of a heartbeat. That would be quite mesmerizing. 2 girls came through the crowd with a lively basket in their hands. They placed it at Ishmael's feet while glancing in awe at his crocodile headdress. He touched their heads, uttering something before raising his palms. And Claire thinks his hands look rather like butterflies rising from the girl's knotted hair. Can you imagine how scared and at the same time intrigued Claire would be right now? And she really can't get away at this point. She's part of the center of attention. She's up on the makeshift dais with Margaret and Ishmael. The crowd draws closer. The drumming increases in tempo but not volume. A woman hands Ishmael a stone bottle. He pours some of the contents around the basket. It smells like alcohol, causing the creature within to stir. A man lit rags upon a stick, then lit the alcohol encircling the basket to the awes of the crowd. Then the basket sounds a cock-a-doodle-oo, and a flute begins to play. Ishmael ties a red head rag to Margaret's wrist. "Oh, there is my handkerchief," she exclaims. The scene is set. Ishmael is speaking in a tongue foreign to Claire, and the rooster crows. "I do wish it wouldn't do that. If it does it again, it will be 3 times, and that is bad luck, isn't it?" Margaret says. "Is it?" Ishmael asks. "Oh, yes, Archie says so. Before the cock crows thrice, thou wilt betray me. Archie says women are always betrayers. Is that so, do you think?" "Depending on your point of view, I suppose," Claire murmurs. And she's watching the proceedings. Margaret says she's hungry and hopes the tea is ready soon. Ishmael reaches in to a bag and hands her a chipped cup and puts it in her lap. "Oh, goody," she happily claps. "Perhaps there'll be biscuits." Claire doesn't think so, looking at all the objects Ishmael has placed on the edge of the dais. Small bones, jasmine, crude carved figures. He speaks, dipping the torch, then opens the basket to grab out the cock. It's a large black bird, trussed so it can't scratch. Margaret thanks him, then proceeds to admonish the noisy bird, biting behind its head before twisting it off. I can imagine Claire being numb at this point. It's crazy town. Claire hears the soft crack of the neck bones and the little grunt of effort as she flung her head up, wrenching off the head of the hapless cock. Then Margaret clutches the gurgling, struggling trussed carcass tight against her bosom, crooning, now then, it's all right, darling," as the blood spurts and sprays into the teacup and all over her dress. The crowd cries out at first, but then quiets. And so does the flute. Only the drum beats on. Margaret drops the bird to the ground, and a boy comes and gathers it up. Then she wipes at her skirts casually before picking up the teacup with her blood-stained hand. "Guess first. Will you have 1 lump or 2, Mrs. Malcolm?" OMG, this is the worst tea party ever. And poor Claire is stuck with the guest of honor. Instead, Ishmael shoves a horn cup into her hand and instructs her to drink. Claire drinks. It's fresh distilled rum, so sharp it makes her choke and wheeze. And then she gets a hint of an herb in the background that has been mixed in. Similar cups were making the rounds, and Ishmael instructs her to drink more. She did, but without swallowing. She might need her wits about her. Good thinking, Claire. Margaret was drinking small sips from her cup. The crowd was rising in expectancy, and a woman begins to sing counterpoint to the drumming. The shadow from Ishmael's crocodile headdress falls across Claire's face. She looks up thinking how heavy it must be as he swayed in rhythm. He raises his hands and begins to sing, and it sends a chill down Claire's spine to where her tail would have been. His voice sounded that of Joe Abernathy's, deep and honeyed and commanding of all attention. If she closes her eyes, she could see Joe. Opening her eyes, she's half shocked still to see the spectacle in front of her, and everyone was looking at Ishmael. Claire tries to clear her head, shaking it, but the herb in the rum was strong, whatever it was. They were all roofied. Don't take drinks from strangers. She couldn't block the sound of his voice rising and falling. And she's lulled. And at some point she comes to herself with a start. The drumming and the singing had stopped. It was silent around the fire. She could hear rustling cane leaves and a rat in the palm frond behind her. Her senses were heightened, and I think she must be rather afraid. This would not be a nice situation to feel stoned in, or drunk, drugged. The drug was diminishing, though, and clarity was beginning to return, but the crowd was still well under its influence. They were staring like zombies. What had Gailey said? Every legend has one foot in the truth. Ishmael, now without the headdress, spoke. Ils sont arrivés. They have come. Who asks? A woman comes forward and puts her hand on the pregnant wooden icon. "Ay, Godot," says Margaret in a voice of an old woman, cracked and high. The woman exclaims with joy before moving back into the crowd with exultant word. Then a young man comes forward asking if who he loves him too, and he held the jasmine spray. Certainement. She returns it, and that of 3 other men besides. Find another, less generous, but more worthy. In other words, the woman he loved is a bit of a playa. Another man came forward, speaking in an African tongue. The voice from Margaret had changed to that of a man's. Her face also seems to have transfigured with the occupant who spoke through her. One by one, people came forward. The face and oracle beside her changed, male or female, mostly older. Do you not sometimes imagine that you see things in the fire? That's what Margaret had childishly said to Claire earlier. It dawns on Claire why Ishmael came back here. He came back for power. He came back for Margaret. Much time had passed, and the crowd had either fallen asleep or went back to their own huts, except for a few men. The leader of the men had come forward, addressing Ishmael. He then asked for Buasa to come forth within Margaret. Claire instinctively moves as far to the edge of the bench, away from Margaret, as she could. Ishmael talks to this Buasa. The other men step back in fear. Then Margaret goes back to her blank self. Ishmael, too, seemed drained as the other men left. And Claire notices something. She sees Jamie near the cane. He raises a finger to his lips, and she nods. She gets up and gathers her skirts, but what about Margaret? And she looks at Margaret, who was bright-eyed again, and from her lips was Brianna's voice. "Daddy?" Claire saw Bree's face in front of her. "Bree? Mama?" "Brianna," said Jamie. "Daddy, I knew it was you. I've been dreaming about you." Jamie, white with shock, moved to cross himself. "Don't let Mama go alone. You go with her. I'll keep you safe." Only the fire made noise. Ishmael stood transfixed. "I love you, Daddy. You too, Mama." She leaned toward Claire. Margaret smelled of fresh blood. Then her lips touched Claire's, and Claire screams. Claire didn't recall jumping to her feet and running to Jamie, but there she was, clinging to him. He made the sign of the cross upon her back. He tells her it's all right, and she's gone. Holy crap! Brianna spoke through Margaret. And Claire didn't want to, but she made herself look back. All was peaceful. Margaret was quiet on the bench, humming to herself. Ishmael stood near her, smoothing her hair with a look of tenderness. He said something to her, and she smiled. "Oh, I'm not a scrap tired. Such a nice party, wasn't it?" He tells her it's time to rest, using bebe again, and two women lead her away. Ishmael stayed, watching Jamie and Claire. And Jamie says he didn't come alone. "Oh, you be alone, man, no matter. The Loa speak to you, you be safe from me." The Loa is a god in the voodoo cult of Haiti. Huh, never did hear a Loa speak to a Bukra. Bukra is a West Indian derogatory term for a white man. And Ishmael shakes his head. He tells them to go now. Jamie says he has come for the boy Ian and will not leave without him. Huh, you forget that boy, he be gone. Gone where? Gone with the maggot, man. And where she go, you don't be going. That boy gone, man. He tells them to leave as others are coming, and he is not safe from them. It's the Maroons coming from the hills. Burwasa called them down. Jamie wants to know where Mrs. Abernathy took the boy. To Abendawi. He wants to know where it is, but Claire knows because Lawrence Stern told her. At least she knows it's on Hispaniola. Claire tells Jamie it's a cave, an old cave. Abendawi a magic place. Clotilde say the maggot take you to the room upstairs. You may be knowing what she do there. Claire says a little as she remembers Gailey's hands, laying out the gems in their patterns, talking lightly of blood. And as though Ishmael caught the echo of this thought, he took a step toward Claire, and he asks her if she still bleeds. Claire says yes, and why does he want to know? The Onisigan was plainly uneasy. He glanced from Claire back to the huts, and there was stirring behind him. Bodies were moving to and fro, with a mutter of voices like the whispers of the cane fields. They were getting ready to go. He tells her, a woman bleeds, she kill magic. You bleed? Got your woman power. The magic don't work for you. It's the old women do magic. Witch someone, call the Loas, make sick, make well. And he gives Claire a long appraising look and shakes his head. You ain't goin' do the magic what the maggot do. That magic kill her, sure, but it kill you too. You hear Buwasa speak? He say the maggot die, 3 days. She taken the boy, he die. You go follow them, Mon? You die too, sure. Holy Michael defend us, Jamie says. They need to talk to Stern to find the exact location. Claire now notices burning in the hills. The Maroons are doing it. A line of women come from the huts with children and carrying their supplies. They see Margaret Campbell among them. Jamie steps out to talk to her, asking if she knows him. Finally, after he speaks several times, she knows him. It's been a lang since I saw you, Jamie. Will you have word of Ewan then? Is he well? All Jamie can say is, he is well, very well, Margaret. He gave me this to keep until I saw you. Then he bends and kisses her gently. Several women stopped and were watching, and they closed in around her protectively. I thank you, Jamie. Tell Ewan I'll be with him soon. Then, with the band of women, she goes into the darkness. Claire tells him not to follow her, let her go, that she's better with them. And he agrees she's right. And now there was torchlight in Rose Hall. It's past time to go. So into the canes, fleeing through the air suddenly thick with the smell of burning sugar, they go. So these last couple of chapters were mostly about Claire's experience, what had gone on with her and what she had learned. And Jamie was really on the periphery of both of these chapters. So Claire has quite a bit of information to go through with him. And Abendawi was the cave on Hispaniola that Stern had talked about, saying it was a very reverent place. It was a spiritual place, a holy place, and it was scary. And this must be where the time portal is. And that's where Galis, or Gailey, I still don't know why there was the switch up of her name, likely went and took young Ian. So she has a picture of Brianna memorized in her head. She had made a pentacle and some sort of spell. And do you think she'll be trying to get back to 1968 because of the prophecy? That'll be fascinating to find out. The next episode of the read-along covers chapters 62 and 63, and those are the final chapters of this book. We will have made it all the way through. Whee! So, the following week, I'm thinking of doing a live chat on YouTube in order to do a roundup of the entire book with you all. Please let me know what you think. We have come 24 weeks together, so we will have 25 in total. Wow. And then with the recap for week 26, that'll be exactly half a year. It's quite stunning. I feel like I know this book so much better now than even the prior rereads that I've done. And I've caught pieces of character development and storytelling that I had never seen before. I love that. And I like that this is really ending with Claire having so much to do and having so much information to share. So please give me your feedback. I want to hear from you. Join into the Wednesday night Twitter chat if you can. It's at 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time. And we use the hashtag ADOO. And it's okay. If you don't know how to tweet, you can just follow along. If you click on the hashtag, it will show you all the tweets. And also, you can call into the listener line at 719-425-9444 and leave your comments to get into the podcast. I would love if you would do that as well. You can also email me at adramofOutlander@gmail.com with your thoughts or comments. And how can you support the podcast? Tell other people about it and share the link. Word of mouth is the best way for people to know about it and to download and listen. And the other way that you can support the podcast, of course, is through financial support. You can make a one-time donation, or you can go to patreon.com/adramofOutlander and give a monthly donation. It does really help. And I look forward to wrapping up this book with you and moving into The Scottish Prisoner straight away. I forgot to go over where to find us. So where can you find A Dram of Outlander? Well, of course, the website, adramofOutlander.com. On Facebook, it's A Dram of Outlander page. There's also a private group only for podcast listeners. Yes, it's called A Dram of Outlander. On Twitter and Instagram, it's simply Dram of Outlander. There is no A in the front. And as always, I appreciate you. And I want you to have a fantastic week. And until next time, Slán Java.